This is about IBC related matters, where many businesses have got severely affected, particularly during this lockdown and also the COVID pandemic. Debts related to COVID shall be excluded from default under the IBC. This is a change which we are going to make, that any debt which is incurred or indebted situation that comes up for companies because of coronavirus, they shall not be included in the category of default. Then no fresh insolvency procedures or proceedings will be initiated up to 1 year. At the moment, I think the MCA has extended it to 6 months. We intend extending it even by another 6 months, because after all, when the lockdown gets lifted immediately, you're not sure how much of business will get restored. So no fresh insolvency proceedings will be initiated up to 1 year. For MSMEs, which is again an important step, for MSMEs, a special insolvency framework will be notified under Section 240A of the IBC. One other thing which will benefit the MSMEs is the minimum threshold to initiate insolvency proceedings is now raised to 1 crore from 1 lakh, which will therefore insulate the MSMEs. This is a major step forward, and in all probability we'll be going through an ordinance, am I right, Secretary? An ordinance to achieve this goal immediately. Of course, we'll go back to the Parliament once the Parliament commences to have it passed as an act. The next is related matter, but related specifically to the Companies Acts and related defaults. That's the next slide. Just prior to the lockdown, we had announced that we shall extend all the compliance deadlines. This form has to be filled up by this deadline, you have to do this compliance by so-and-so deadline. All of them were extended, and so that procedural defaults don't take place. Technical or procedural defaults was one thing which people were afraid of if we hadn't extended the compliance date. So now what we are trying to do is decriminalize most of the sections in Companies Act where you have violations which are technical and procedural in nature. So we want to decriminalize all of them. Then compoundable offences where there are, they can now be tried under internal adjudicating mechanism, and this way, one, it becomes simpler, it can be sorted out at the local, the local internal adjudicating mechanism route rather than go to the courts. This will help us decongest the courts. The declogging is absolutely important for the criminal courts and for the NCLT. So amendments will now enable us to achieve all this. An ordinance again will have to be brought in for this. 7 compoundable offences altogether will be dropped, and 5 will be dealt with under alternative framework. There was a thing introduced in the Parliament, but then we didn't even have the time to take it up. But this has 1 or 2 other additional features with which we will now come up with an ordinance so that immediately it can benefit companies. The next one also relates to the corporate affairs. In order to make it easier for companies, there are several features, but I'll highlight only 2 of them. The rest will be shared to you. First is, this will help companies to directly list their securities in foreign jurisdictions. So now companies can list their securities directly in foreign jurisdictions. So this is one big step forward for Indian companies. And then second, listings of non-convertible debentures on stock exchange will not be regarded as those companies as listed companies. So if companies were to just put their non-convertible debentures in the stock exchange, it doesn't mean that they become listed companies. So these are 2 steps, but of course there will be more which will be shared to you. You will be able to get the further details on it. For want of time, I don't want to spend more time on it. We would like to announce a public sector enterprise policy. An Atmanirbhar Bharat needs a coherent policy. All sectors will be open to private sectors also. Public sector enterprises will continue to play an important role in defined areas. We need a coherent policy because sometimes you opened up some sectors in piecemeal. This sector is open but not that. That sector has always been with public sector, it shall be with public sector. It's never available for others. So, we are coming up with a coherent policy wherein private sector will be allowed to participate in every sector available, but of course public sector will continue, and they will continue to play a very critical role. And public sector, when I say public sector, I mean public sector enterprises. Public sector enterprises will continue to play a very important role, and we shall now define the areas in which their presence will be impactfully felt. So the Government of India will announce a new policy which will broadly categorize strategic sectors and the others. And the strategic sectors in which the PSE, public sector enterprises, will be present will be notified. In those notified sectors where PSV, public sector enterprises will be present, at least one public sector enterprise will be present. In those sectors which get notified as where you'll find the public sector enterprises, at least one public sector enterprise will be present, whilst private will also be allowed to play their role in it. However, in those sectors which get notified as strategic sectors in which public sector enterprises will be present, only 1, 2, 3 or 4 public sector enterprises will be present. In the sense, not more than 4 public sector enterprises will be there in that strategic sector notified for the presence of public sector enterprises. So if a sector is notified, and in that if there are 10 public sector enterprises, either they will be merged together or they will be brought together in such a way that they are only 4 or lesser. So there won't be mushrooming public sector enterprises in those notified strategic sectors. So in the notified strategic sectors, definitely public sector undertakings or enterprises will be present, but private sector will also come in. But imagine a particular sector which is notified as strategic. If there are too many public sector enterprises, they will either be brought together to form bigger public sector enterprises, and in that process we will not have more than 4 of them. They can be lesser than 4, but not beyond 4 public sector enterprises in those notified strategic area. Private sector can slowly come in and be present and compete in every sector, but the detailed policy will soon be opened up and issued.